Basically, I would start with Darren and Steve, just in case, or for people who do not know who you are, maybe shortly describe what you are doing.
Yeah, I'm Steve White. I'm editor of the Mesozoic forthcoming Mesozoic Art 2, editor of the first one, and editor of the previous dinosaur art permutations of these books. The first one, which is now horrendously 13 years old, which I did for Titan Books. Yeah, so, and now I'm a full-time artist, part-time editor by night, and I also write other stuff. My background is in comics, so I'm still heavily involved in that. Okay. Anything else? Any questions? Joshua's just asked an interesting, how did this one come about? Actually, do you want to do your intro, Darren?
Check. Can you hear me?
Positive.
Check. Yes.
That's weird. Thank you, Steve. My name's Darren Naish. I am based in Southern England. I am affiliated with the University of Southampton, but I'm not employed in academia. I am PhD'd and I do publish technical work on predatory dinosaurs, sauropods, marine reptiles, pterosaurs, and various other animals that interest me. I regard myself as a zoologist. I blog at Tetrapod Zoology. Have published a bunch of books, most recently Dinopedia, Ancient Sea Reptiles, published by the Naturalist Museum, and a little volume called Mesozoic Art 2, which is why we're here today. Off the back of Tetrapod Zoology, I was headhunted by people making a TV series in about 2017, which became Prehistoric Planet seasons 1 and 2, and as you all know, Prehistoric Planet Ice Age, which comes out in November. Oh boy, you're in for a treat. Oh wow. Yeah, it's going to be something else. So I got into TV just at the right time, got involved in those things. That was great. But now it's dying. Now it's all going away. It's not ever going to happen again. So that was a brief golden age, and I was very pleased to be part of it. So I think that's probably enough intro from me. Nice to see you all. And sorry, Steve, back to you. You were going to say about the book.
But Joshua just asked how the book came about. I guess depending how far you want to go back, as I say, the original dinosaur art was published 13 years ago. Darren did play a part in that. He even though he was unpaid accepting books, he was kind enough to check out the sort of scientific sections that we wrote for that book. But it was just because the whole book came about simply because I worked for Titan Books at the time, who had no experience doing anything paleo related. It was just a casual conversation one day with one of my fellow editors about the quality of paleo art. And I was surprised that these books had never, that the artwork had never been collected in a book. And he said, well, why don't you do a pitch? So after about 2 years of toing and froing, I finally got the book off the ground, mainly because I persuaded Titan that the book would be very cheap to do, that we wouldn't have to pay for the artwork, it would only be royalties. So yeah, so finally in 2012 the first book came out, and yeah, and it's still in print, which is quite amazing after over a decade. So and then there was a shift in marketing teams at Titan who were no longer interested in doing these kind of books. They were more interested in fiction. So after the second book, after the second collection and Julia Satoni's collection, the whole thing skidded to a halt. And then as a result of a casual conversation on Twitter, I was approached by Bloomsbury about, I casually said, well, if somebody can find me a publisher, I'd happily do a third volume of dinosaur art. And Bloomsbury got in touch. And one of the caveats was that I could do the book so long as Darren was in it. Because by then he was like, you know, the man, the myth, the legend of paleontology. So, you know, it was kind of a no-brainer, really. But yeah, so that one came out, what was it, 2022, 23? I have no idea. Yeah, and did well enough that they asked for a second one, and here we are next week.
Yeah, it's coming next week. So they asked for a second one. What is it for you? Is it some kind of snapshot of the current paleo artist like level where it stands?
I'll let Darren answer that one because I've talked enough.
Yeah, so I see. Like in Germany, it's a couple days later, so it's.
What was the question? Sorry, when does it come out?
Is the artwork a sort of snapshot of current paleo art?
Yes, I would say that this is a representative cross section of where we're at in terms of paleo art today. That's kind of the aim that we are thinking of. So we not deliberately necessarily, but have, you know, kind of been quite global in our scope. I think that Steve and I talk about this quite a lot. I think that if you were compiling a paleo art themed book only 20 years ago, it would mostly be guys called Dave in Southern England. And that's no offense to anyone called Dave from Southern England, but that is still the case. You know, England's still an important place. Europe is an important place. But I think increasingly we do have paleo art traditions on all the continents except Antarctica. And we have a sort of, you know, more diverse, eclectic group of people experimenting with different styles. There is often a kind of like local feel, you know, like South American artists often have like a South American look to their art to a degree. You could say the same for people in Europe and Western Asia and Eastern Asia also. Yeah, so yeah, I think this is a good snapshot of where we're at, and as Steve has said, the success of the predecessors to this, the success of Mesozoic Art and the success of the dinosaur art volumes beforehand means that there's sufficient faith from our publishers to let us ever expand and you know, include more artists and more pages. So the previous one was 20 artists. This one is 25. The previous one was it 10. Steve? Was it? Sorry,
they were 10 each. The dinosaur art ones.
Oh, dinosaur art, yeah, 10 each. Wow, that's slim volumes. This is 256 pages. This is a big, hefty book, and I've got a feeling isn't that more than that's over 20 or 30 pages more than Mesozoic Art. I think it was 220.
It was like about 260 original of the first Mesozoic Art. This one's literally an extra 50 pages of sumptuousness.
So I would like probably to everyone here, you know, when you think of, oh, thanks, Joshua. Joshua's showing the previous volumes there. So mine's thicker than yours, Joshua. I would say that, you know, to us, we're kind of quite used to. For those of you who can't see, Joshua just dropped them on himself. We're maybe quite used to what like modern paleo art looks like, but I know from people in like natural history filmmaking and Hollywood and, you know, just like people that are interested in natural history art, that when they see this stuff, they're like, oh my God, people are doing stuff like that. I mean, obviously, so many people in paleo art today are deeply embedded within the kind of like hyper-real tradition. But the fact that we've also got, I mean, I can't ever flick through a book and just find the page I want. But, you know, like, so randomly, I just saw Natalia Jagielska's work here. The fact that, you know, this is like, you know, deep, beautiful, proper art. It's very colorful. It's also scientifically accurate. And if you aren't in our world, you just have no clue there's stuff like that out there. So I recommend, you know, anyone interested in natural history, wants to know what current thoughts are on life of the past, this is you kind of like best go to sort of benchmark on this is what we're thinking, this is where people are at right now.
I also think, you know, we've been, you know, we have Natalia's work, but there are some other like very, very like other artists with very different styles and approaches. Say, like, one of the people that I wanted very early on was DJ Washington, whose stuff I love, you know, even though I think some people would say, well, it's not really paleo art, it's more like designy, which fair enough. And then you've got like Curtis, his artwork, which is a very sort of graphic, almost like comic approach, you know. And then, you know, dovetailing and segueing beautifully into that is Louis LaRossa, because he's the first, you know, because of my particular background in comics, having a comic artist who is a brilliant paleo artist in there was great. And Louis' stuff is just brilliant. He was just one of those guys that I was immediately, you know, oh my God, I've got to get Louis in there. And it's, you know, I think one of the important things about dinosaurs is how they segue very much into pop culture, you know, as for better or for worse. Anyway.
Before we go into I will do a screen sharing through the exhibition we have. But before we do it, how do you select the 25 people? You have, like I do from the events and exhibitions I do, I know there are so many amazing artists, paleo artists out there. Like, how did you select exactly these 25 for the second?
I would say I'm like one of those guys you hear about in old Hollywood who stood at bus stations waiting to pick off starlets getting off the bus from Missouri. You know, it's like I haunt the internet looking for people whose work I like. And if, you know, because you get that thing of like, you get a recommendation, you know, because you follow certain people, you know, and there are people on Twitter who I follow simply because they seem to have their own keen eye on who's hot and who's not. And, you know, so from my perspective, I sort of, if I see someone, I'll follow them on whichever platform. Usually will keep a piece of their artwork aside as a prompt for me. I also have an ongoing list of, you know, of artists already sort of lining up for volume 3. But yeah, I'm just kind of, they come here looking to, you know, break into paleo art, and then they find themselves having to, you know, do another drawing of Spinosaurus, you know, and it's all very disappointing for them, you know. But, you know, it's that's basically my methodology. Yeah.
So Darren, were you also highly involved in selection, or what is your role? And maybe combine it with Sean's question: what does the role of an editor like this involve?
The primary role of selection is Steve's kind of project more than mine. Obviously, we talk about things, and agree, and, you know, bring attention to people whose stuff catches our eye. But yeah, absolutely on board with everything Steve just said. In terms of
Darren, just to be, you know, to show that it isn't just all about me going, like, Darren will make suggestions. There will be people that Darren will say, I think we should have this person, and I'm just like, you know, often there have been cases where I was unfamiliar with that person, so it's been, you know, it's very handy.
Yeah, and, you know, this is in a way a function of the digital age, because if you're following enough people and in this world, you can keep tabs on brand new stuff, which think how hard that would have been prior to social media. So social media is good for something, right?
Yeah.
some benefits have come from it.
Yeah.
Editing, I mean, space is obviously like our primary thing that we've got to, because this fundamentally, this is a book that's meant to be gorgeous to look at. So the sort of, the amount of space we've got for text, how much text, because think how many things you can say about any piece of art. You could write literally probably an entire book on a single piece of art. So we've got to be incredibly what's the word? We've got to be really, really strict and yes, I can't think of the right word. Self-flagellatory. You've got to be quite mean to each other. It's like, no, it can only you've got 200 words to talk about this.
You can only have 90.
Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of bashing text into shape last minute. And the nature of the art is often that things are pretty dynamic and change at the last minute. So for these projects so far, there has been a last minute scramble, which is very, very painful, which has involved literally nights without sleep. But I don't see another way of doing it. And I'm happy for, that I think that's part of the process. I don't begrudge that. And it's getting across the messages that things we've already been saying. We're in the introductory text. Yeah, there's a massive amount of theory about paleo art. Again, you could write. Imagine if you actually did a proper introduction to where we're at in paleo art today. You just write. It's not difficult to write 20 or 30,000 words as a writer. Could easily just do a whole massive weighty intro on the theory of paleo art with no pictures in it. But it's like we can't.
A good version of the Tashin one.
A good version of the Lascasse's book, a very controversial thing. Let's not say that again. Yes, we just need this brief, choppy, intro. Where are we at? And so that I've waved my arms around quite a lot there, not said anything specific, but basically that's what's involved in editing it. So
I would also say as the sort of while Darren's doing all the writing, I kind of do the liaison with Bloomsbury as the editor. And the other sort of great part of the job, and I think it's our favorite part, is picking the artwork, because we ask the artist to send in a batch of artwork, which we then cherry pick our favorites, and that goes back and forth, and there's a little bit of discussion.
We should say also very briefly, composition obviously is also key, and keeping with it, it being an art book. So what we actually have as the what do you call the first piece of art that introduces the artist? The opener, the intro art. What specifically? What's that going to be, and what are the themes, and how are the pictures going to be arranged? There's a lot of discussion about that, and then also covers and back matter and the the boards and all these beautiful little things that if you take off, I'm going to give you a bit of a spoiler here, but underneath the dust jacket, look at that. We can do stuff like this on the board, so that the books have got to be striking and beautiful, and they have succeeded, but there's also an element of friendly compromise, because what Steve and I might imagine as the most attractive, most ideal image for a cover, people in marketing might not agree with us. So that's another lengthy discussion.
Yeah, it's the amongst editors, there's the quote of no cover survives first contact with the marketing department. Of the 4 volumes, the 2 dinosaur art, the 2 Mesozoic art, only the first one kept the original cover. All 3 subsequent volumes went through a cover change once they met the marketing team, who said no, it's not funky enough. As I said to Darren the other day, the thing to remember about marketing teams is that they're like the Sith. They only think in absolutes, which is why the very first volume was called Dinosaur Art, the world's greatest paleo artists. 2 things there which were untrue, because it wasn't all dinosaur art, and it wasn't necessarily the world's greatest paleo artists. It was just the people that agreed to do the book, because there were those that declined for various reasons that are quite difficult to talk about. But anyway.
I guess sometimes it's just tricky. How many people do you approach basically before you, like you have a specific set of art and pages you need to fill?
The first one, I had my initial list of 10 artists who all, oh no, only one agreed from the off not to get involved. Interestingly, they were all American who declined, mainly for financial reasons. But yeah, so there were other artists who I had as a fallback position in case people did decline. The very first artist that I asked was Gregory Paul, because I thought if he turns it down, there's probably not much point in doing this book, because at that point, Greg Paul was sort of like, I don't know, for better or for worse, the Leonardo of paleo art. He was the man that, you know, at that point in history was so influential. But so the first book came out, huge success, biggest non-licensed book that Titan had ever done, well, non-licensed hardback art book, huge hit. Like the first print run was 10,000 copies, which was unprecedented. So when it came to the second one, at that point, there was enough of a reputation that the 10 artists I asked all said yes. And that was how it went after. The 20 artists that we asked on Mesozoic Art all said yes, because they were aware of the dinosaur art books. And so it went on Mesozoic Art too. I can't think of anybody on the second book who said no or couldn't do it. And on the first Mesozoic Art, no, I think, yeah, it was the reputations of the previous books preceded them, so everybody was keen to get involved.
I think we had one person who said no to first Mesozoic Art, and it was because of a clash with a
that's
yes, right. having to do like a giant museum mural, but I won't say who she is because we don't need to, but we got her for the second volume. So
yeah, and also like Rebecca Dart, who actually was the artist on the and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but she's on the hardboard of Mesozoic Art too, the Under the Dust Jacket, which I asked her and she declined to do in the first one because she was busy. And so when it came to doing the second one, I went back to her and sort of said, look, and she actually said to me, worst mistake I made was saying no to the first one. So she was like, yes, absolutely yes.
No, it's really nice to hear that it's like, even though in the first place they rejected it for whatever reason, you can just come back anytime, you can collaborate.
Yeah.
Further.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes there are people that, you know, we want to include that they literally can't because they're like, we're just like knee deep in it, you know. In terms of, you know, how we actually choose the artists, I guess we try and, you know, there are some people who, you know, have contacted me. When the first Mesozoic Art came out, I was contacted by a couple of artists who were like, why wasn't I asked? Why was they were affronted that they hadn't been included. And it's like, it's nothing personal. It's just, you know, sometimes you've got people, you know, there are a group of artists who have a similar style and you can't have all of them. You can, if there's 4, you can maybe have 2. So it's just a matter of getting, you know, getting that sort of match of styles. And, you know, it has been great that there has been a definite rise in the number of paleo artists, which again I think is very much to do with the democratization, and you know, the more it's so much easier to sort of see good paleo art on social media. And it's just meant, you know, when I first did dinosaur art, they were all and mainly American, mainly British, 2 Europeans, and they were all men. And that was because even then, the outreach from social media was far more limited, you know.
There was one more question. When you browse or like search for artists, do you use special hashtags or something? If you say, okay,
I saw that from Amanda, yeah. Not really. I guess I follow certain hashtags, and again, I just find it is that sort of scary thing about the algorithm. If you look at enough like things often enough, it will start sort of saying, aha. And so you see artwork will pop up, you know, by artists that you've not seen before. But sometimes I will just look, you know, under paleo art or dinosaur art. But to be honest, I've really not had to. It's usually just been stuff that's, you know, I've just, something's caught my eye during the course and looking for something else.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I would share my screen to share the current exhibition.
Fundamentally, I think our message, and we probably say this, so I've certainly said this in talks about paleo art, is most paleo art, if art has any function, if paleo art has any function, specifically, it's mostly prehistoric wildlife art. And I would say that although there is, you know, scope within that, doesn't mean that everything has to be a naturalistic scene. The bulk of what people want to see is along those lines. It's the representations of, you know, ancient animals and ancient environments. So I think that a good number of the pieces are selected. Like if someone has given us like a number of works, we want I don't know, maybe half of those will be what we regard as conventional paleo art scenes, animals in well represented environments, and then some others are portraits, animals up close, animals in profile, animals seen from an unusual angle. Well, and within that sphere, I would say that it would be unusual for you to see representations of animals that aren't naturalistic, for example. So the selection we're seeing here, I mean, you know, many people that are interested in paleo art are also interested in sort of, you know, elements of fantasy art and, you know, cartoon style depictions and all sorts of things in the world of fantasy. I would say that probably the push is to we wouldn't get that past our editorial team if we tried it. And I don't think we would, because I don't think that's in keeping with the theme. So those are a few thoughts. What do you think, Steve?
I mean, yeah, I think one of the things that I think a lot of people, I would say probably a lot of people here should probably bear in mind is the fact that they are not, while they are obviously a target audience, they're not necessarily the target audience. We're talking, the point of these books from Bloomsbury's perspective is a book that is generally accessible to members of the public, people like who might be buying a Christmas present for their nephew who they know likes dinosaurs, and having lots of beautiful pictures of dinosaurs and related imagery is what Bloomsbury are looking at. I mean, I had to do a certain amount of arm wringing over some of the work that we used on Lewis's stuff, because while, you know, the point there was that his dinosaurs are incredibly technically accurate, but they're not represented as paleo art per se. They were pieces from his comic work. So, but you know, it is that thing of, you know, the fact that pop culture has such a sort of love affair with dinosaurs. So yeah, I think from my perspective, it's trying to make a book that is accessible to everyone. And that, as Darren said, that does mean sometimes you're forced to compromise.
And can I say that I don't think this might not be well known enough. We make it clear in both of the books why go with the title Mesozoic Art? And it's this idea that we're not necessarily saying we're showcasing artwork depicting Mesozoic animals. We came up with this idea like before we started the first one, obviously. Many of us that know about prehistoric animals and think about life of the past are interested in the life of today. And you know that as you're wandering around and you encounter modern scenes, modern animals, you might be very, very interested in modern animals and modern environments, but you're often thinking about them in kind of like a deep time historical context. What would this pond look like if it was 5 million years ago and there were giant mastodons, in the pond instead of the pigs or donkeys or whatever that I'm looking at? I think of a lot of scenes that way. And I know I'm not alone. I know that lots of other people think about modern scenes with a prehistoric eye, and that's why we coined Mesozoic art. And this is stated specifically in the introduction to the first one. You're looking at things with this Mesozoic eye, not meaning specifically Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, something to do with like the deep time historical perspective. And so that is also in keeping with what both of us have said about it being like, wildlife art, but wildlife art generally depicting animals or life of the past, which is itself connected to a broader issue. What is and what isn't paleo art, and that itself is an interesting question, which I won't elaborate on because I know I'll talk for too long about it.
Yeah, I mean, you can get artists who have such diverse style that you can find yourself in sort of something of a roadblock trying to sort of represent that, bearing in mind you've only got 10 pages and that translates to often maybe 15 images, so yeah, and it's often you're reliant on, we've been lucky, we rely on designers to actually sometimes pull that together. Our design has been very good and will often spot a trend in the artwork. Like if you send in a bunch of art and there are 3 images for like marine artwork, he'll know to put those all on the same page. I mean, sometimes you go back and forth, there'll be a little back and forth with the designer saying, well, can we move this one here, or can we replace this one with that one, and that kind of thing, usually at the start of the whole process. But yeah, it can be quite an arduous, editorial process.
Yeah, this ties into what we were saying about finding compositions that highlight the work that really. I'm looking at some of the pages now, and I don't have very good color vision, and I'm not very good on color theory, but I know what it is, and I can see that the way that some of the pictures have been designed works according to color theory. Like I'm looking at a selection of pictures here by Rebecca Dart, and the areas of illumination in the 3 pictures on the same page fit in a way so that the illumination is kind of like more in the center of the whole of the image, so the dark parts are coming away from it, and the actual composition of the positions of the animals themselves. We all know that if you're right-handed, you'll tend to draw left-facing animals, and vice versa. In the digital age, that's the digital technologies have made life a lot easier because we can all flip our illustration so your animals don't all face the same way. But now imagine positioning artwork according to, are you going to have 3 animals that are all in the same pose standing on a beach in the same way, or are you going to have it so that one is facing left, one of them is close up obliquely at you, and one of them is pointing away from you? You've got to think about all those kind of things. And I would say that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I think that it's probably easier than it ever has been due to the diversity of styles that people now keep in mind, and the diversity of compositions and the positions of their animals. Probably easier than it ever has been from a portfolio, even if it's relatively small, to find compositions that do work in this way on a page. I mean, I never look at any of the compositions, even in the earlier stages, and think, oh, that doesn't work. The animals all look, the animals all look the same, which is which was a concern, decades back. It's like all your animals are running to the left with their mouths open. That doesn't happen anymore.
I mean, there's a little bit of sort of design theory here, was that designers, certainly art book designers in these kind of situations, like to have the image going towards the gutter, the middle of the book. So we had several occasions where the designer wanted artwork flipped so that they were pointing into the gutter. And there were a couple of occasions when the artists were like, no, I don't want that flipped. It kind of changes the emphasis, or it just doesn't work for me, and that kind of thing. But yeah, it is one of those weird things that, I think that's another one of those little things that maybe people who aren't in publishing won't necessarily think about. It's like, well, there are reasons why these things happen, sort of thing. I mean, it's actually like it's like the cover for Dinosaur Art, the very first book. We flipped it mainly to make room for the logo, because again, people like, if you're going to have a logo sort of drifting to one side, it's better to have it. People prefer it on the right, because the way that we in the West lay books out, they tend to be with the, it's like when you look at a magazine rack in a shop, it's the right hand section that is sticking out. So you want that bit, you want something that is kind of going to be eye catching, like you want that logo so that people will go, Dinosaur Art, what manner of creature is this?
I find it interesting that if you know a piece of artwork well, and you then do see a flipped version of it, it's either wrong, it's fundamentally wrong, or you might actually for a moment think it's a different piece of art that you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Because often, this is an interesting cultural thing. But yeah, the way we look at images, the way we sort of scan them and remember them is something deeply ingrained in how we process stuff. And so you can't willy-nilly, there's famous cases of publishers like flipping art upside down and mirroring it and all kinds of stuff, and it's like, you can't just do that. We're obviously acutely aware of that, and I don't think we've had problems with our publishers trying to force anything on us, but you can understand in other genres, there's other books where this does happen.
It's also why Billy the Kid was thought to be left-handed. Because they printed the negative round the wrong way, and it became mythologized that Billy the Kid was a left-handed gun.
Well, I never did. Wow.
I mean, Stephen was kind of an interesting one, because when he originally sent over his artwork selection, it was mainly the formation stuff. And my feeling was that it was a bit of a sort of like one-trick pony. It's lovely artwork, but I wanted, because I'd seen, I think he'd done a woolly rhino piece, which I really loved. So I went back to him and sort of said, have you actually got any other things that aren't like the formation stuff? And he sent over, and one of them was that T-Rex, which I loved. And I think is actually his opener. I think we used it as his opening piece.
Oh, we used the T-Rex under the tree for Stephen, but we did also, if those of you who can see my little camera, you can see this. I think it's Kellen Ken, the Forest Raked. Yeah, wow.
Because it's funny, it's like you get artists that they won't send some of their work because they're like, oh, it's we didn't think that was right. It's like, no, send it. I love this stuff, please. So it's you will sort of get artists that go through a bit of a moment of pain and doubt. There was like artists on the previous books that kind of went through a bit of a sort of meltdown because they were just like, oh my God, my artwork's just not good enough. Why have you asked me to be in this book, sort of thing? And you just like chillax, it's fine.
Well, real quick, I want to jump back to something Steve just said, because I was definitely one of those people when I got the email from him where I'm like, hey, this is a really weird way to start spam. Like, who's going to impersonate him? And then I'm like, did you send this to the right guy? And I think all of us probably go through that phase one point or another where a little bit of like, all right, am I really worthy of this? But
and that was the thing. I loved your style. Again, not to sort of keep banging on about it, but it was the sort of almost like the comic influence that sort of really spoke to me.
Yeah, and definitely with my style, because I know when I was looking through the copy that we all got, my wife even pointed out, like, I think half the people in here mentioned James Gurney and Dinotopia and the Walking with Dinosaur series, and I'm like, that's definitely true. The one I don't see enough people point out for me is Ricardo Delgado and the Age of Reptile series. And that has probably been one of the biggest influences on my style. I found the second series of that when I was, I think, like 10 years old in my local mall. And it's definitely played a huge part in all of my work. Definitely more of the comic-y style. And I know I've had a number of people ask me, like, how do you find your style and stuff like that? And my answer is always the same, which is just you keep drawing. It literally just, you just keep drawing, and your style is kind of where you end up. And weirdly enough, my background's actually in 3D work. That's what I went to school for. That's what I did predominantly for the last decade. And the illustration stuff was just starting out more as something to do as kind of like in my free time. And it's just something different, and it's taken off more recently. And yeah, it kind of develops from what you like to draw and how you like to draw. I definitely have that as well, where if something comes out, seeing artwork that other people have done, new piece about, new species been discovered, those are definitely in there. The other thing I frequently do is I have a whole separate file. I do most of my work on my iPad in Procreate. And so I have a whole file that's literally just my garbage sketches, which I think every artist has that, whether it's a sketchbook or something. This is the garbage stuff that you will never publish unless someone points a gun to your head. And that's where I do a lot of my doodling. And a lot of the time it's literally just, I have, TV on, music on in the background. I'm literally brain off, just kind of letting things come out, whatever forms I like. And then just every now and then you do one where it's like, oh, that actually looks really nice. And that's the one where it's like, okay, well, those will get set to the side. And then whenever I finish something, I'm usually coming back to that document where everything is mostly garbage. And then I go through the ones that I actually like. And then it's like, okay, which of these pieces really speaks to me? And usually it's taking it from there, where it's, okay, I like this one, I have a solid idea where I want to take it. Like whether it's the pose, the subject, like it's all over the place for me. And yeah, just want to go from there. Like, I think the one that you have on the screen right now, that was literally inspired by probably some underwater shots that I'd seen. Like someone posted some photography that they did when they were snorkeling somewhere. And I just love the reflections on the top of the water, just kind of like the hazy light shining through. And that was what inspired this one. But yeah, for me, it's all over the place, really.
I love it.
And these, yeah. So the people and the dinosaurs, that's kind of been a more recent thing for me. Obviously heavily Dinotopia inspired. But yeah, that was literally one of those where I did it as a side piece, as something different. And people liked it. So I'm like, all right, well, I liked making it, so I'll make some more.
So, hello guys, I'm Haider Jaffri. I'll just do a brief introduction of myself. Paleo artist as well as a recently registered dentist. Just gonna start my work in a prime dinosaur location, hopefully in November, in the Isle of Wight. So that would be interesting. So yes, I'm also one of the 25 artists featured in Mesozoic Art 2. Honestly, just like most people, it was definitely like I was a bit left a bit speechless when I first saw the message that was opened by Steve, and I was like, damn, I'm like, this is truly like something that what seemed like a very huge opportunity for me. And I was like, let's go for it. And to be featured among so many amazing artists in the book truly felt like a huge honor for me. And thanks to Steve and Darren for the amazing help in this. It definitely meant a lot to me. It did. I mean, I do, apologize on my behalf for taking so much time wrangling the pieces. Because it's a funny thing. A lot of the original pieces I had, I also deleted them just to save space. Since I have Procreate, so a lot of them were like saved on my phone. I don't know. It's just I'm not that much of a technology guy. I had to come to work, but a lot of pieces I had to, readjust the resolution, which kind of took some bit of a, spark of the original pieces, but it did work out the end, which I was happy about.
And did you work on pieces extra for the book, or how did you approach it?
Originally, that was my plan to work on extra pieces, but over time it seemed, unfeasible when it's when you also have to juggle a lot with university work. So I did um, set some unrealistic expectations on my behalf. But otherwise, at the end, a lot of old pieces were used, which I was very happy with. Some of my favorite pieces were also used in that book, and it came out looking good, nice. So I really appreciated that. These some of the pieces you're seeing. These are mainly recent. This one is actually in the book. Spoiler alert. But yeah, this was the orthocone piece. There was a study that came out last year that there was this whole ring that surrounded Earth during the Ordovician period. So that was very interesting, and it was a bit trendy at the time. So I decided to hop on the train and draw it.
This is actually
So
a good example of. I was a bit disappointed with the size that this piece was used. I actually argued because I wanted it larger, but they were kind of like, it would have sort of unbalanced the spread. So, again, one of those sort of compromises that I was forced to make.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I mean, it's definitely one of those things that you have to. But at the end of it, I was happy that this piece was actually used, since it's one of my, I would say personally, one of my favorite I've done there in the book. So it's definitely was nice to see that piece make it through.
I also
And
think it was, sorry to interrupt.
sorry,
I
continue.
was just to say, I wanted it I liked it in the book because I just think to like general readers, they will be unfamiliar with that notion.
Yeah.
Oh, it's also from the composition really nice. How you captured the reflection on the water. So it is.
Thank you.
So you also do different pieces. You also provided this one. So what else?
Sorry, continue.
No, you can just start. Like basically, what was your like? What is the intention? It's not your only piece in size comparisons.
This was I should provide a full description actually. This piece basically, they were the two currently known bears that used to live in Africa. Basically, that was the whole idea. So this one is an interesting piece. On the left is the Atlas bear, which lived up till fairly recently, uh, and went to extinction thanks to us 200 years ago. But Atlas bear also genetically, I've heard interesting things about it. It's quite ancient when it comes to brown bear subspecies. But I'm not too well versed in that whole field, so But this upper bear shown here is Agriotherium africanum, which is another interesting thing about this bear. It's a member of a panda lineage. And there was a study that came out in 2023 that basically reclassified some Agriotherium species, as well as Indoctris, I believe. And some Agriotherium species were classified into a new genus called Huracan, which is quite an aptly named creature. And Agriotherium, basically, just to give a TDLR, it's primarily suggested to be carnivorous, or some say hypercarnivorous, and it was cursorial, meaning it was adapted to run on open landscapes, which is a complete opposite of its closest living relatives, which is the giant panda. So I definitely feel that was a cool thing to include. There might actually been a third bear in Africa, but I'm not too sure. I think it was the Etruscan bear also might have ranged into North Africa, but other than that, I'm not too sure about. But the Atlas bear and Agriotherium are definitely one of the two that I felt was appropriate to include in this.
Yeah, so
And
this
it's a
is
recent piece by me.
yeah, so it's a recent piece and also like inspired by some publication where you thought, okay, this might be also a really nice comparison also to see, especially the size comparison.
Yeah. Also, just added a bit of panda inspiration as well onto the facial markings. So just say it is a relative of the creature.
We have Simone's video. I will try to play it, and I will play a couple of seconds and will kindly ask you for a short feedback if you can hear the sound, because I shared with sound.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but I hope that this recorded panel will work as well. Today we will talk about Mesozoic Art 2, and one of the specific aspects of my work that I think that could provide some food for thought for my fellow paleo artists and my fellow paleo enthusiasts present today. I want to thank Karim for having me and for this amazing virtual exhibition, and Darren Naish and Steve White for the incredible work in the publication of Mesozoic Art 2. But first, before starting with this panel, let me introduce myself. Hi, I am Simone Zoccante. Some of you might know me already. I'm a natural history illustrator, which means that my job is to create illustrations and artworks that explain to a wide audience some of the topics of the scientific research in the field of both extinct and living organisms. Here you can find a bit of my resume. In the center, there are my independent publications, the books and the pamphlets that I published from 2019 up to now. At the right instead, you can see me during workshops teaching paleo art and paleontological reconstruction at some universities and some schools. And below you can find some of my selected clients, basically in the museum field, publishing companies, and science communication. Here is a brief section showing some of the awards I have received in wildlife illustration and paleo art competitions since the beginning of my career. And here are the cover and the artists featured in Mesozoic Art 2. I'm so happy and honored to be part of such a talented group. For those who will purchase the book, you will find a great example of how diverse the discipline of paleo art can be. You will see more graphic and pop style illustrators, as well as some comic artists. Some of these artists are paleontologists, and others are natural history illustrators like me, specializing in both living and extinct animals. Why am I mentioning diversity? Because the diversity of paleo art and its variations is a topic that we will explore later on. And here is a little preview of what you will find in my chapter. Some of the paintings featured are already known, but I have created 3 new paintings, like the one blurred on the top right corner, that are unpublished. I will not share these paintings, at least for now, because I want the first customers to have the joy of the surprise. As we delve in my portfolio, we can start to see a bit of the diversity I mentioned before. I'm a self-taught artist. Everything that I know about natural history, illustration, and art is the fruit of my personal studies since my young age. This means that I have never had a trainer. that could teach me and sometimes impose me a particular style. So I had the freedom to explore a large quantity of styles and visual languages, making them mine. Scrolling this section of my portfolio, we have seen some more vintage and classic scientific illustrations, as well as digital engravings in black and white, as well as vibrant and realistic paintings. Every one of these specific tables with its style has been crafted for a specific purpose, and the style is part of that purpose. Here, for example, we can see some applications of the different style I used for different products. Vintage scientific illustration can be especially appreciated in mainstream contexts like certain magazines, creating an interesting contrast between the modern look of the magazine's graphic and the old-fashioned charm of the vintage style illustration. This style was even requested me by the United Nations when I worked earlier this year at their stamps collections. For example, the series dedicated to the endangered species. And here is a mix of, again, modern and old-fashioned illustration styles, where a vector illustration created with Adobe Illustrator can be mixed with more realistic and old-fashioned digital paintings. This was a series on modern amphibians' courtship behaviors that was exposed at the Natural History Museum in Genoa in 2024. In the rest of this panel, I will bring you 4 examples of 4 different paleo art pieces, and I will share with you some of the insights of their making of. A paleo art piece as a part of storytelling. It is like a zip file filled with information and emotions. Today we'll see a few examples of how convey different types of information or feelings depending on what is our communicative goal. Whose is this eye that is watching us? It is a Suchomimus eye from my work Ancient Gadofawa, a painting about the El Raz formation in Niger. And here we can find some of the scientific material that I used as a reference. Like, for example, I did a reconstruction of the Suchomimus skull, and below there is the bibliography that I used to create the painting. But even if there is a hard scientific core in this painting, my goal was to deliver a more artistic message. The complete title of this painting is Ancient Gadofawa Air, because the real protagonist of this painting is air. Yes, Suchomimus is in the foreground, but everything that we see is closely connected to the wind and the approaching storm. For example, we can see the chicas bowing in the wind. We can see the air inflating, the wings of the Anyanguera flying over the river. And there is also a sandstorm gusting in the background, where a group of Tyrannosaurus is approaching the river. This is a work designed for an audience that loves naturalistic illustrations, and it is intended as a decorative piece that evokes emotions in the viewer. It does not convey any particular educational message, although it is of course up to date with the recent studies. And here we have another eye. I must have a thing for eyes. This is the second work I selected for this visual exhibition, Encounter Under the Rain, a life-size portrait of the bust of an adult Gorgosaurus libratus in its environment. As before, here we can see some of the reference material I used, such as this beautiful skull in the top corner right, and the bibliography I used to reconstruct both the main subject and the environment. Like the Gadofawa painting from before, the primary goal of this work is not science communication. The goal of this painting is to allow the viewer to establish a connection with the subject. That's why I chose to portray the dinosaur at life size. This was a painting that I created imagining it for a museum that had Gorgosaurus remains in its collection. If we place this life-size print next to these remains, it would allow the viewer to form a bond with the animal and observe it. Observe it not as a museum specimen, not as a bloodthirsty animal or monster it is often depicted in traditional media, but as a simple animal, depicted resting in its natural environment in a calm situation. Here is an example of what I mean. In this mockup we can see a person, the visitor, observing the artwork next to the skull of the specimen on display. Even if this is a mockup, we can already imagine the impact on a visitor seeing this combination. So, if there is anyone in the audience who is in contact with a natural history museum that has Gorgosaurus in its collection and might be interested in this work, my contacts information are at the end of the presentation. Here instead we have a submarine eye, another kind of eye, that belongs to Basilosaurus isis, the protagonist of the third painting in this exhibition, Trophic Dance. This is a painting depicting a situation that actually occurred and it is documented in the fossil record. An act of predation by Basilosaurus isis on a young Dorodon atrox in the Eocene seas of Egypt. And here we are. Here is the reference material I used along with the bibliography I consulted to create the artwork. You can see the two skulls, one of the Basilosaurus at the top and one of Dorodon, which I used as a reference. In the bottom right, there is also a map of the Wadi al-Litan site in the Fayoum, Egypt. The goal of this work is clearly science communication. At the Wadi al-Litan site, which in Arabic means the Valley of Whales, a fragment of a young Dorodon atrox skull was found. Dorodon was a basilosaurid roughly the size of a pilot whale, around 6 meters. The skull fragment of this young adult individual, which was probably no longer than a couple of meters, showed marks bite that the science determined were left by the teeth of Basilosaurus isis. An arcuate the size of a sperm whale that must have been the terror of the Eocene seas. Most likely 37 million years ago, the Wadi al-Litan site was a shallow water area, used perhaps by Dorodon as a reproductive nursery, given the large number of young individuals found there. It is possible that Basilosaurus from time to time raided this nursery, preying on the juveniles. This painting was conceived as a museum mural, but it also works in other science communication contexts, for example, publishing. In fact, it can be found alongside the story in a booklet I published in 2023, which narrates the paleontological facts. The booklet is currently available only in Italian. We couldn't conclude it without another eye, this time for lovers of terrestrial mammals. This is the eye of an Amphimacherodus giganteus, taken from a museum mural-sized painting I created in 2022, which depicts the fauna and flora of the Miocene site of Pikermi in Greece. Here we can see a part of the bibliography I used to create this work, along with the skull of Amphimacherodus giganteus that I kept as a reference during the reconstruction of these animals. The goal of this piece is primarily educational, as it was created to serve as the main artwork for a museum exhibition dedicated to the fauna of Pikermi. Pikermi is an extremely important site for understanding the fauna, flora, and the environment of southern Eurasia in the late Miocene. This piece was intended as a visual compendium of the Pikermian ecosystem, allowing the viewer to grasp its main characteristic at a glance. In fact, there are the main groups of animals that help determine the type of environment and vegetation. There are the browsers, such as the giraffe Bolinia attica and the Proposidian Deinotherium proavum, indicating substantial forest coverage. And there are also the grazers, such as Myotrigoceros gaudrii, suggesting that the forested areas were interspersed with open savanna-like patches. Looking at this panel, we can infer that the top predator of the area was Amphimacherodus giganteus, and that maybe it lived in small family groups. This painting also includes seed-dispersing animals, which are very valuable for the environment, such as the primate Mesopithecus pentelicus, perched on a carob tree, and the tortoise Titanochelon, visible in the foreground among the grass. The viewer's eye is guided by the composition so it can move across the painting, from right to left and from left to right, taking a small safari through the Mycenaean Europe. This is what I meant when I said that a paleoart piece is like a zip file of knowledge. It can contain a vast amount of information, both about biological composition and inferences about animal behavior, all within a single image that can be understood regardless of the viewer's spoken language. The artwork and the related facts are included in a booklet dedicated to the environment of Southern Europe during the Miocene, where we can find in-depth information of the main groups of animals and the plants in the Pikermi biota. This artwork is also the center of some project currently in development. At the moment, the exhibition dedicated to the fauna of Pikermi is being prepared, which is looking for an institution interested in investing in the project. The goal of this exhibition is to discuss ongoing climate changes using the faunal and environmental shift of the late Miocene as an example. On the right, you can see some of the examples of how this artwork has already been used in editorial products and museum exhibitions. And I couldn't conclude without one final gem, to show the versatility that paleoart can have in terms of style and applications. The style you see here is what I call digital engraving, created by taking inspiration from ancient engravings, while giving them the versatility and the freshness of digital illustration. For this work, I was contacted by a winery of Pikermi to create wine labels featuring the site's fauna. This is what I meant by a paleoartist acting as a visual director. Depending on the context and communicative goals, different styles and modes of expressions can be used, while still maintaining scientific rigor and coherence. In conclusion, let's recap the 4 works I brought to this exhibition and their differences, starting with Ancient Gadofawa, where the goal is to immerse the viewer, focusing on the sensation depicted. Then we have Encounter Under the Rain, featuring the portrait of Gorgosaurus, aims to create a more intimate connection between the viewer and the fossil organism portrayed. With Trophic Dance, we enter an illustrated chronicle of an event preserved in the fossil record. Finally, with the last work depicting the Pikermi biota, the goal is educational. In a single glance, the viewer can extract a wealth of information that visually summarizes the scientific studies conducted on the ecosystem. So, thank you for your time and attention. I apologize again for not being here in person. I will catch up on the other talks, and I hope my presentation has been inspiring. If you have any question, feel free to write me down. And thanks to Karim, thanks to Darren, and thanks to Steve for the work that you have done. And enjoy the venue. Bye.
Basically, I think when it comes to paleo art, like digital seems to be the dominant one at the moment. There have also been a lot of good traditional works that have, but I think at the end of the day, when the future direction of paleo is mainly just how well you integrate scientific knowledge into your pieces. I think that's how I see it going as, to be honest. Less so with the medium, but more so with like how you can integrate scientific knowledge into various different styles, not just one, but like several different styles, and see how they flow together. Medium, I mean, medium wise, yes, digitally is more common, but I think it's just a lot of people nowadays seem to be very hyper fixated into accuracy, but at the same time, I feel there should be a lot more reason to be more flexible with your work, to be honest. Not to like hyper, I mean, I always like I punish myself with being a bit too into detail, but now I'm like kind of saying to myself, like, chill out. It's not too deep when it comes to work. So I think that's one of those. I won't say there's a clear-cut answer to this, but this is pretty much my main thoughts on to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only a traditional artist because I never started out as an artist. You know, I was first and foremost an editor and writer and other things, coloring and what have you. But so drawing was just something that I did on the side, and I never something that I regret was like never embracing digital artwork, even though I used to share a studio with 3 other artists, and one of them, this was in the sort of mid 90s, was one of the first guys I ever knew who sort of embraced computer artwork. And at the time I was very dismissive of it, mainly because I was scared of it. We all fear what we don't understand. And but interestingly, I think within certain fields, people are sort of moving back to traditional in the same way you've seen the rise of vinyl and cassettes and what have you again. There's sort of a weird nostalgia, but I think social media is kind of really going to change paleo art. The other thing is that it's also made information far more accessible. I mean, I remember when I first started drawing dinosaurs, when I was working on the Orbis part work, actually it's how I first met Darren, really. But we sort of met each other at a dinosaur convention that was run by a paleontologist named Mike Howgate in London at Conway Hall, and Darren was there. Oh, there you go. There's one of my Orbis. Yeah. And I was doing the center spreads for the Orbis thing. But the point was that there was like no, aside from books, there was no real, you didn't have the kind of accessibility to the sort of more academic information. You were kind of reliant on, I remember when Predatory Dinosaurs of the World came out, and it was just like, oh my God, this is the book I've been waiting for. Why are there not more on every single type of dinosaur? Because it had muscles and it had skeletons and all this kind of thing. You weren't just relying on, the Reader's Digest book of dinosaurs that probably was drawn by someone who never drew dinosaurs before. But yeah, and I remember like Darren used to send me packages of academic papers, that were massively helpful to me. But I think these days, as an artist, paleo artist figuring out, you've got immediate accessibility. There are people that you can go to and say, hey, look, or you could put a question out on X or Facebook or whatever and say, hey, I'm working on this. Anybody got any ideas on how this should look or whatever? And there will be people that will be able to tell you that. And I just think that kind of, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the democratization of paleo art. It's it's people working within, there's this sort of mutually fulfilling little field of people that, or quite big field of people that, are willing to help out. The shark book I'm working on at the moment, there's been people that, I've been able to contact and say, hey, look, I'm doing this. Any chance you can help me with that? And I just think that is the future. That is where we're going. It's just going to be so much. I don't know. And weirdly, again, this sort of ties in with what's happening in comics. People aren't now, people aren't rushing to go and work for Marvel and DC. And I think, these days, a lot of people are self-publishing, and I think that's true of paleo art and comics. And most people aren't being, I would say the vast majority of artists that are in Mesozoic art aren't necessarily published artists. They're artists whose presence, whose fan base is purely on social media. And I think that's going to be that's the seismic shift that is happening.
I think that nearly everybody has to be involved in the digital world in view of, how work is disseminated and shared, for reasons of self-promotion. To get eyes on your stuff, you have to be digitally savvy, and even the most least digitally savvy person is digitally savvy these days. There's no one that isn't, really. Having said that, right, I think that's like an inescapable part of 21st century life, whether we like it or not, basically. But right, bear with me. Who agrees with me here? What excites me about art is the physical, is the actual thing. I like a picture on a screen, yeah, whatever. I'll look at it for a couple of seconds, but I own as much like actual artwork as I can get. I've got a bunch of it unframed in this office, like some quite special original pieces done, you know, by seminal artists back in the 70s and 80s and such. I'm talking of paleo art, obviously. I'm talking about, you know, sort of meter wide pieces that deserve framing and on a wall. And I think that nearly all of us, if you're interested in looking at pictures, if you're interested in this stuff, you want an excuse to actually go and see physical art. And like, I think most of us dream of the idea of, like, you know, digital gallery is wonderful, is a brilliant thing, but it's nowhere near does it give like the thrill and excitement and, you know, beauty that you want from actually looking at art. I mean, I was lucky enough to go to the Traveling Dinosaurs Past and Present exhibition on probably the last week of its run. I saw it in 1991 at the Natural History Museum in London, entirely by fluke. I just happened to be in London and got to see it. I hope most of you know about Dinosaurs Past and Present, you know, like a dream paleo art exhibition. And since then, you know, there have been a few things where like the Lansendorf collection has been viewable, things like that. We've had paleo art exhibitions at the Tetsucons and the first DinoCon, as most of you know. But we want like that. You want to go to an exhibition and see all this like amazing art in person, and that's never gone away. That's always there. And my final point on this is that, if anything, I actually think that there's probably more of a push to, now that we're all quite rightly concerned about the way things are going in the digital world, you know, let's not mention the term AI, but there you go, I've mentioned it. Given that we're concerned about that, if anything, there's like, I want humans doing human-made stuff. I want to see that. I want to experience it in person. And okay, traveling around the world is obviously like a huge, big problem. Like that's not an easy or doable thing for many of us, but that's what we want. I think if anything, there's going to be almost like, you know, those of you who have published stuff, who are established artists now, for those of us who like your stuff, I want to go to your gallery and see like the Haider Jaffri Hall of Art, you know, like not necessarily calling it Haider. Haider did the cover for my Ancient Sea Reptiles book, which, you know, that, wow, thank you. But yeah, that's where I'm going with this. I think we need more. We want more physicality for art. And I'm there's a quite vague, and anyone could have said that, but that's how I feel about it. So digital art is good, and you've got to do it. But ultimately, with physical animals, we want to experience stuff. We want to see stuff. I want to see your stuff in a physical space. That's where I'm going with this. Well, that's also, sorry to build on that, but that's also an interesting thing in terms of this discussion about digital versus physical art. So, and I think about this a lot with respect to music. For the longest time, people said, don't put your music online for free because then people won't buy it. But all the music that I buy, I only buy it because I've heard it for free online today. And I wonder if there's kind of a similar thing with paleo art. If people are going to interact, and probably all art, if people are going to interact physically with art, like buy it, me seeing a picture on even the biggest monitor I have, which is, I don't know, 70 centimeters wide, like seeing the art at that scale is no comparison to the physical printed thing. Even in a book, it's just not the same quality. I'm not the sort of person that only wants to see stuff on a computer screen, because I want to be able to like carry stuff around, you know, have things physically in different places. From when I want to look at a picture when I'm not sat in front of my computer, when I'm not sat on my desk. So an argument can be made that even if you do put a good amount of stuff online, it probably doesn't affect what people interact with physically. Oh, and sorry, I'm so sorry. One last thing. So Simone's presentation was outstanding. He was at DinoCon and he gave me these booklets. So of course there's this huge backstory to every single piece of paleo art that's ever been done, but he has like self-published these booklets that describe every detail of the process. And oh my goodness, they are just like things of great beauty. And when I got these, I'm like, how have you done this? Who published this? He's basically funded it himself. So Steve, I have copies of these for you. I think all of us would just like, wow. So yes. All right, thank you. That was me. Yeah.
I was just going to say, when we did the original dinosaur art, we actually approached the Natural History Museum about doing a art exhibition, but they were not interested, sadly. Even though we did a launch event there, we kind of wanted to do a proper art exhibition, and I think that could well be part of the problem. You need to find like-minded individuals who willingly give you the space to do something like that. I think it should be generally available in any good bookshop around. I mean, if you can bear to sort of order through Amazon, you can get it through Amazon. I think pretty much. Yeah,
This really varies on where you are in the world. So Bloomsbury have got offices. They have an office in Australia, for example. They got an office in, I think, South Africa. So like, it's really different. I mean, the USA, obviously, who knows? Total wilderness.
I think even Japan.
Yeah. So the civilized parts of the world, you probably can. No offense, Americans. Yes, some countries it's not going to be difficult, is it? And it's not going to be much more expensive than it is here in the UK. That's my understanding. Other parts you might have to wait a while, or you might have to pay extra to get it shipped, as Steve said. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'm really sorry to bug out like this, but I will hopefully meet some of you very soon.